From Pacifica, this is Democracy Now!
When Donald Trump talks about making the country great again, for many people, it wasn't that great, quite the opposite.
Today, a Democracy Now! Special. Noam Chomsky, Harry Belafonte, Patti Smith, Danny Glover, Juan Gonzalez, and more, gathering at the historic Riverside Church in New York City to look back at the first 20 years of Democracy Now! And to look at what lies ahead during a Trump presidency.
In a few weeks from now, if there is a platform on which I will be privileged to stand and speak, my opening remarks will probably be something like, "Welcome to the Fourth Reich."
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. In Charleston, South Carolina, a judge has declared a mistrial in the murder trial of a white former police officer, Michael Slager, who was caught on video fatally shooting 50-year-old African-American Walter Scott in the back as he ran away April 2015. Officer Slager had stopped Walter Scott for a broken taillight. After Scott fled the car, video filmed by a bystander shows Slager fatally shooting Scott in the back from more than 17 feet away. Despite the distance and the fact that Walter Scott was unarmed, Officer Slager argued during his trial he was in total fear for his life. There were 11 white jurors and 1 black juror in the jury, which deadlocked after 4 days of deliberations. This is Judge Clifton Newman.
I have a final note from the jury. It says, "We as the jury regret to inform the court that despite the best efforts on all members, we are unable to come to a unanimous decision in the case of the state versus Michael Slager." So I'm going to bring the jury out and to declare a mistrial.
Walter Scott's killing in 2015 sparked protests nationwide. Prosecutors say they'll retry the case. This is Walter Scott's mother, Judy Scott.
I believe God. I am encouraged because I know God is able. Say so. He will get his just reward. And we have the federal trial and another trial to go. I'm just waiting on the Lord. I'm just going to rest in the Lord. I don't care what man say. I don't care how it looks. It's not over. Y'all hear me? It's not over till God say it's over.
The jury of 11 white jurors and 1 black juror was chosen from a city, North Charleston, that's almost half African-American. The mistrial comes after a jury deadlocked in another high-profile police killing, the fatal shooting of African-American Samuel DuBose by white former University of Cincinnati police officer Ray Tensing in Ohio, 2015. A Republican member of the Electoral College has come out saying he will not vote for President-elect Donald Trump when the Electoral College meets on December 19th. Christopher Suprin, a paramedic from Texas, wrote in an op-ed published in the New York Times Monday, Trump is, quote, not qualified for the office of the presidency, and called on his fellow Republican electors to unite behind another Republican presidential candidate, such as Ohio Governor John Kasich. In Florida, 3 voters have sued to demand a hand recount of the paper ballots, alleging the presidential election was skewed by hacking and malfunctioning voter machines. Donald Trump was declared the winner of Florida by more than 112,000 votes. Meanwhile, a recount in Michigan is running into problems due to a state law that says a voting precinct cannot be recounted if the number of ballots in the box don't exactly match the number on the poll books. The law could make precincts across Michigan ineligible for the recount. recount. To see our interview with the Green Party's Dr. Jill Stein, who sued for the recount in Michigan as well as Wisconsin, go to DemocracyNow.org. President-elect Donald Trump and his daughter Ivanka met with Vice President Al Gore Monday to discuss climate change. Trump has rejected global scientific consensus and called climate change a Chinese hoax. This comes as the volcano peaks of Hawaii's Big Island have been hit by nearly 3 feet of snow, with meteorologists warning more is on the way. The Washington Post has revealed the Pentagon sought to bury an internal study that revealed the Pentagon's vast bureaucracy race as much as $125 billion. Sources told the Washington Post the Pentagon hid the study out of concerns Congress would use it to cut the defense budget. Palestinian leaders in the international community are expressing outrage at the Israeli parliament's vote Monday to retroactively legalize thousands of Jewish-only settlements on Palestinian land in the Israeli-occupied West Bank. The settlements are considered illegal under international law. The measure passed the first of 3 required votes during a contentious session Monday, 60 to 49. This is Arab-Israeli lawmaker Ahmed Tibi.
The
law of organizing and legalizing the settlements, AMONA specifically, is one of the most dangerous laws. This says that the state and its institutions are focusing on settlements and changing the law or putting the law or facing the High Court, which ordered the evacuation of AMONA for these houses that were built on stolen Palestinian land, whose owners exists.
In news from Morocco-occupied Western Sahara, 22-year-old media activist Walid Fatal was sentenced yesterday by a Moroccan court to 14 months in prison for filming a peaceful protest in the city of Smara last November 25th on International Day for the Elimination of Violence Against Women. 20 protesters, mostly women, were injured by police at the protest, according to the Sahrawi women's group Fafesa. The court found Fatal guilty of obstructing a public road and attacking a police officer, but Fatal claims he was only filming the protests for the Sahrawi media group Samara News. He's one of several media activists recently arrested and tried by Morocco in the Western Sahara, where independent journalists are frequently harassed. Last month, Reporters Without Borders called on Moroccan authorities to stop violating the rights of Sahrawi and foreign journalists and to end all reporting restrictions in Western Sahara, a territory occupied by Morocco for 41 years. Back in the United States, on the Standing Rock Sioux Reservation in North Dakota, Wes Clark Jr., the son of retired U.S. Army general and former Supreme Commander at NATO Wesley Clark Sr., led military veterans in a ceremony Monday to ask forgiveness from Native Americans for the crimes of the U.S. military. Thousands of Native and non-Native veterans have descended on Standing Rock to support the water protectors fighting the $3.8 billion pipeline in recent days. This is Wes Clark Jr.
We came, we fought you, we took your land, we signed treaties that we broke, we stole minerals from your sacred hills, we blasted the faces of our presidents onto your sacred mountain, and we took still more land, and then we took your children, and then we tried to take your language, and we tried to eliminate your language that God gave you, and that the Creator gave you. We didn't respect you. We polluted your earth. We've hurt you in so many ways. And we've come to say that we are sorry. We are at your service, and we beg for your forgiveness.
That was Army veteran Wes Clark Jr., son of U.S. retired Army General Wes Clark Sr., former Supreme Commander of NATO, kneeling at the feet of Leonard Crow Dog, Lakota medicine man and spiritual leader of the American Indian movement, who was part of the 1973 occupation of Wounded Knee. On Sunday, the U.S. Army Corps of Engineers denied the Dakota Access Pipeline Company a permit to drill underneath the Missouri River, halting construction for now. Water protectors have committed to remain at the resistance camps and stay vigilant, and the company has vowed to build on. To see our coverage of Sunday's historic victory, go to DemocracyNow.org. Meanwhile, advisors to President-elect Donald Trump told Reuters they are proposing to privatize Native American reservations in order to further accelerate the extraction of oil, gas, and other minerals. In response, Tom Goldtooth, head of the Indigenous Environmental Network, said, quote, "Our spiritual leaders are opposed to the privatization of our lands, which means the commoditization of the nature, water, air we hold sacred. Privatization has been the goal since colonization to strip Native nations of their sovereignty," unquote. In Flint, Michigan, residents are warning the lead-poisoned water is still undrinkable and may be getting even more toxic. Flint resident Melissa Mays of the group What Are You Fighting For? Said, quote, "The longer we wait to change our pipes, the worse our water gets," unquote. Last week, a judge rejected the state of Michigan's attempt to stop delivering bottled water to Flint, warning of irreparable harm to residents. In New York City, a 45-year-old Muslim transit worker wearing a headscarf was attacked Monday, pushed down the stairs at Grand Central Terminal, and called a terrorist in the latest of a series of hate crimes against Muslims following the election of Donald Trump. On Saturday in Brooklyn, another man violently threatened an off-duty Muslim police officer, referring to her as ISIS and saying, quote, "I will cut your throat. Go back to your country," unquote. In Oakland, California, residents are mourning the death of at least 36 people who were killed in a fire at the Ghost Ship warehouse Friday night. The fire is one of the deadliest building fires in the last half-century in the United States. The Ghost Ship was an artist collective that housed many young artists and musicians, and the victims were overwhelmingly young artists, activists, and community organizers. This is Oakland resident Amir.
Obviously, I'm sad. I knew two people in the fire named Alex and Anna. Obviously I'm sad, but I'm more concerned about their family and their well-being. More than that, I've lost two friends.
Meanwhile, in Baltimore, Maryland, authorities have abruptly shut down an artist space called the Bell Foundry, citing safety concerns. Artists say the space was raided and they were abruptly evicted from their collective workspace with their things locked inside. They described the Bell Foundry as a haven for queer people and people of color, with one artist saying, quote, "This place saved my life," literally. And the state of Georgia is slated to execute William Sally at 7 p.m. tonight. Sally's lawyers have demanded his execution be halted so he can have a hearing to address claims of juror bias, an issue that has not yet been heard by a court in his case. If executed tonight, Sally will become the 9th person killed by the state of Georgia this year. And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On Monday night, over 2,300 people packed into the historic Riverside Church here in Manhattan to celebrate the 20th anniversary of Democracy Now! Democracy Now! First went on the air on the eve of the 1996 New Hampshire primary. The date was February 19, 1996. The show began as a radio show on a handful of stations. Today, over 5,000 episodes later, Democracy Now! Airs on over 1,400 public television and radio stations across the globe. Well, today we spend the hour airing highlights from last night's celebration. We begin with Noam Chomsky, world-renowned political dissident, linguist, author, Institute Professor Emeritus at the Massachusetts Institute of Technology, where he's taught for more than 50 years.
I'd just like to begin by saying a word about what a privilege and honor it is to be able to participate in the celebration of the remarkable success of Democracy Now! For these many years, and in particular the quite astonishing achievements of Amy Goodman, Juan Gonzalez, their colleagues, in showing us how we might aspire to achieve Democracy Now! It'll be a long struggle, and again, it's an enormous pleasure to be able to share this occasion with people like Harry Belafonte, who has been such an inspiration in being in the forefront of this endless struggle for many hard years. And for the young people among you, a special word. You'll be facing problems that have never arisen in the 200,000 years of human history, hard, demanding problems. It's a burden that you can't ignore, and we'll all you in particular and all the rest of us will have to be in there struggling hard to save the human species from a pretty grim fate. Well, my wife and I happened to be in Europe on November 8th, that fateful day. In fact, in Barcelona, where we watched the results come in. That had special personal resonance for me. The first article I wrote, or at least that I can remember, was in February 1939 it was about the fall of Barcelona to Franco's fascist forces. And the article, which I'm sure was not very memorable, was about the apparently inexorable spread of fascism over Europe and maybe the whole world. Old enough to have been able to listen to Hitler's speeches, the Nuremberg rallies, not understanding the words, but the tone and the reaction of the crowd was enough to leave indelible memories. And watching those results come in did arouse some pretty unpleasant memories, along with what is happening in Europe now, which in many ways is pretty frightening as well. Well, the reaction to November 8th in Europe was disbelief, shock, horror. It was captured pretty eloquently on the front cover of the major German weekly Der Spiegel. It depicted a caricature of Donald Trump presented as a meteor hurtling towards Earth, mouth open, ready to swallow it up. And the top headline read, "Thus ended der Welt," the end of the world, small letters below, "as we have known it." There might be some truth to that concern, even if not exactly in the manner in which the artist, the authors, the others who echoed that conception had in mind. It had to do with other events that were taking place right at the same time, November 8th, events that I think were a lot more important than the ones that have captured the attention of the world in such an astonishing fashion. Events that were taking place in Marrakesh, Morocco. There was a conference there of 200 countries, the so-called COP22. Their goal at this conference was to implement the rather vague promises and commitments of the preceding international conference on global warming, COP21 in Paris in December 2015, which had in fact been left vague for reasons not unrelated to what happened on November 8th here. The Paris conference had the goal of establishing verifiable commitments to do something about the worst problem that humans have ever faced, the likely destruction of the possibility for organized human life. They couldn't do that. They could only reach a non-verifiable commitment, promises, but not fixed by treaty and a real commitment. And the reason was that the Republican Congress in the United States would not accept binding commitments. So they were left with something much weaker and looser. The Morocco conference intended to carry this forward by putting teeth in that loose, vague agreement. The conference opened on November 7th, normal way. November 8th, the World Meteorological Organization presented an assessment of the current state of what's called the Anthropocene, the new geological epoch that is marked by radical human modification, destruction of the environment that sustains life. November 9th, the conference basically ceased. The question that was left was whether it would be possible to carry forward this global effort to deal with the highly critical problem of environmental catastrophe if the leader of the free world, the richest and most powerful country in history, would pull out completely, as appeared to be the case. That's the stated goal of the president-elect, whose regards climate change as a hoax and whose policy, if he pursues it, is to maximize the use of fossil fuels, end environmental regulations, dismantle the Environmental Protection Agency, established by Richard Nixon, which is a measure of where politics has shifted to the right in the past generation, and in other ways accelerate the race to destruction. Well, that was essentially the end of the Marrakesh Conference. It terminated without any issue. So that might signal the end of the world, even if not quite in the intended sense. And in fact, what happened in Marrakesh was a quite astounding spectacle. The hope of the world for saving us from this impending disaster was China. Authoritarian, harsh China. That's where hopes were placed. At the same time, the leader of the free world, the richest, most powerful country in history, was acting in such a way as to doom the hopes to total disaster. It's an astonishing spectacle, and it's no less astounding that it received almost no comment. Something to think about. Well, the effects are quite real. COP21, the Paris negotiations, could not reach a verifiable treaty because of the refusal of the Republican Congress to accept binding commitments. The follow-up conference, COP22, ended without any issue. We will soon see in the not very distant future even more dangerous, horrifying consequences of this failure right here to come to term to address in a serious way this impending crisis. So say take the country of Bangladesh. Within a few years, tens of millions of people will be fleeing from the low-lying coastal plains simply because of the rise of sea level with the melting of the huge Antarctic glaciers much more quickly than was anticipated, and the severe weather associated with global warming. That's a refugee crisis of a kind that puts today's crisis, which is more a moral crisis of the West than an actual refugee crisis. It will put this current crisis into, it'll seem like a footnote to a tragedy. And it's the leading climate scientist in Bangladesh has reacted by saying that these migrants should have the right to move to the countries from which all these greenhouse gases are coming. Millions should be able to go to the United States. The United States and indeed the other rich countries that have grown wealthy, as we all have, while bringing this new geological epoch bringing about this new geological epoch, which may well be the final one for the species. And the catastrophic consequences can only increase. Just keeping to South Asia, temperatures which are already intolerable for the poor are going to continue to rise as the Himalayan glaciers melt, also destroying the water supply for South Asia. In India, already 300 million people are reported to lack water to drink, and it will continue both for India and Pakistan. And at this point, the two major threats to survival begin to converge. One is environmental catastrophe, the other is nuclear war, another threat that is increasing right before our eyes. India and Pakistan are nuclear states, states with nuclear weapons. They're already almost at war. Any kind of real war would immediately turn into a nuclear war. That might happen very easily over over struggles over diminishing water supplies. A nuclear war would not only devastate the region, but might actually be terminal for the species, if indeed it leads to nuclear winter and global famine, as many scientists predict. So the threats of survival converge right there, and we're going to see much more like it. Meanwhile, the United States is leading the way to disaster, while the world looks to China for leadership. It's an incredible, astounding picture, and indeed only one piece of a much larger picture.
MIT Professor Emeritus Noam Chomsky, world-renowned political dissident and linguist, speaking Monday night at Riverside Church as part of the celebration marking 20 years of Democracy Now! After a short break, we'll hear the conclusion of Chomsky's speech, as well as comments from Harry Belafonte, Danny Glover, Patti Smith, Juan Gonzalez, and more. Stay with us.
In the squares of the city, in the shadow of the steeple, near the relief office, I see my people. Some are grumbling, and all are wondering if this land's still made for you and me. Tell them! This land is your land. This land is my land. From California to the River Island, from the Redwood Forest to the Northern Colorado. This land was made for you and me. Jump! This land is your land. This land is my land. Come on! From California. Come on! To the River Island. Come on! From the Redwood Forest. Come on! To the Northern Colorado. This land was made for you and me. This land was made for you and me.
Tom Morello of Rage Against the Machine performing This Land Is Your Land Monday night at Democracy Now!'s 20th anniversary celebration with a little help from the crowd at the historic Riverside Church. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org. I'm Amy Goodman. We return now to MIT professor Noam Chomsky speaking at the event.
The U.S. isolation at Marrakesh is symptomatic of broader developments that we should think about pretty carefully. They're of considerable significance. U.S. isolation in the world is increasing in remarkable ways. Maybe the most striking is right in this hemisphere, what used to be called our little region over here. Henry Stimson, Secretary of War under Roosevelt. Our little region over here where nobody bothers us. If anybody gets out of line, we punish them harshly. Otherwise, they do what we say. That's very far from true. During this century, Latin America, for the first time in 500 years, has freed itself from Western imperialism. Last century, that's the United States. The International Monetary Fund, which is basically an agency of the U.S. Treasury, has been kicked out of South America entirely. There are no U.S. military bases left. The international organizations, the hemispheric organizations are beginning to exclude the United States and Canada. In 2015, there was a summit coming up, and the United States might have been excluded completely from the hemisphere over the issue of Cuba. that was the crucial issue that the hemisphere, on which the hemisphere opposed U.S. policy, as does the world. That's surely the reason why Obama made the gestures towards normalization that were at least some step forward and could be reversed under Trump. We don't know. On a much more far-reaching scale, something similar is happening in Asia. As you know, one of Obama's major policies was the so-called pivot to Asia, which was actually a measure to confront China transparently. One component of the pivot to Asia was the TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership, which excluded China, tried to bring in other Asia-Pacific countries. Well, that seems to be on its way to collapse for pretty good reasons, I think. But at the same time, there's another international trade agreement that is expanding and growing, namely China's what they call their Regional Comprehensive Economic Partnership, which is now drawing in U.S. allies from Peru to Australia to Japan. The U.S. will probably choose to stay out of it, just as the United States virtually alone has stayed away from China's Asian Infrastructure Development Bank, a kind of counterpart to the World Bank that the U.S. has opposed for many years, but has now been joined by practically all U.S. allies, Britain and others. That's at the same time, China is expanding to the West with the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the China-based Silk Roads. The whole system is an integrated system of energy, resource sharing, and so on. It includes Siberia with its rich resources. It includes India and Pakistan. Iran will soon join, it appears, and probably Turkey. This will extend all the way from China to Europe. The United States has asked for observer status, and it's been rejected, not permitted. One of the major commitments of the Shanghai Cooperation Organization, the whole of the Central Asian states, is that there can be no U.S. military bases in this entire region. Another step towards isolation may soon take place if the president-elect carries through his promise to terminate the nuclear weapons, the nuclear deal with Iran. Other countries who are parties to the deal might well continue. They might even Europe mainly. That means ignoring U.S. sanctions. That will extend U.S. isolation even from Europe. And in fact, Europe might move under these circumstances towards backing off from the confrontation with Russia. Actually, Brexit may assist with this, because Britain was the voice of the United States in NATO, the harshest voice. Now it's out, gives Europe some opportunities. There were choices in 1990-91, time of the collapse of the Soviet Union. Mikhail Gorbachev had what he called a vision of a common European home, an integrated cooperative system of security, commerce, interchange, no military alliances from the Atlantic to the Pacific. The U.S. insisted on a different vision, namely Soviet Union collapses and NATO remains and indeed expands right up to the borders of Russia now, where very serious threats are evident daily. Well, all of these are significant developments. They're related to the widely discussed matter of decline of American power. There are some conventional measures which, however, are misleading in quite interesting ways. I'll just say a word about it. Of course, there's no time, but it's something to seriously think about. By conventional measures, in 1945, the United States had reached the peak of global dominance, nothing like it in history. It had perhaps 50% of total world's wealth. Other industrial countries were devastated or destroyed by the war, severely damaged. The U.S. economy had gained enormously from the war, and the U.S. in general had a position of dominance with no historical parallel. Well, that, of course, couldn't last. Other industrial countries reconstructed. By around 1970, the world was described as tripolar, three major economic centers, German-based Europe, US-based North America, and the Northeast Asian area, at that time Japan-based. Now China has moved in as a partner, conflict and partner. By that time, U.S. share in global wealth was about 25%, and today it's not far below that. Well, all of this is highly misleading because it fails to take into account a crucial factor which is almost never discussed, though there's some interesting work on it. That's the question of ownership of the world economy. If you take a look at the multinational corporations around the world, what do they own? Well, that turns out to be a pretty interesting matter. In virtually every, this increasingly during the period of neoliberal globalization of the last generation, corporate wealth is becoming a more realistic measure of global power than national wealth. Corporate wealth, of course, is nationally based, supported by taxpayers like us, but the ownership has nothing to do with us. Corporate ownership, if you look at that, it turns out that in virtually every economic sector, manufacturing, finance, services, retail, and others, U.S. corporations are well in the lead in ownership of the global economy. And overall, their ownership is close to 50% of the total. That's roughly the proportion of U.S. national wealth in 1945, which tells you something about the nature of the world in which we live. Of course, that's not for the benefit of American citizens, but of those who own and manage these private, publicly supported private quasi-totalitarian systems. If you look at the military dimension, of course, the U.S. is supreme. Nobody's even close. No point talking about it. But it is possible that Europe might take a more independent role. It might move towards something like Gorbachev's vision that might lead to a relaxation of the rising and very dangerous tensions at the Russian border, which would be a very welcome development. Well, there's a lot more to say about the fears and hopes and prospects. The threats and dangers are very real. There are plenty of opportunities. And as we face them, again, particularly the younger people among you, we should never overlook the fact that the threats that we now face are the most severe that have ever arisen in human history. They are literal threats to survival, nuclear war, environmental catastrophe. These are very urgent concerns. They cannot be delayed. They became more urgent on November 8th for the reasons you know and that I mentioned. They have to be faced directly and soon if the human experiment is not to prove to be a disastrous failure.
MIT professor Noam Chomsky, world-renowned linguist and political dissident, speaking Monday night at Riverside Church as part of a celebration marking 20 years of Democracy Now! To see the whole evening's events, including clips of Democracy Now! Over the last 20 years, go to democracynow.org. After a short break, we'll hear from Harry Belafonte, Danny Glover, and Juan Gonzalez.
As I surrender into my sleeping, I commit my dream to you. People have the power to dream. People have the power to vote. People have the power to strike. People have the power to live. The power to dream, to rule, to wrestle the world from fools. It's decreed the people rule. Well, it's decreed the people rule. Listen, I believe everything we dream can come to pass through our union. We can turn the world around. We can turn the earth's revolution. People have the power. People have the power. The people have the power. People have the power. Don't forget it. Use your voice.
Patti Smith performing People Have the Power, along with Michael Stipe of REM, at Monday night's celebration of Democracy Now!'s 20th anniversary at the historic Riverside Church here in New York. I'm Amy Goodman. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The War and Peace Report, as we turn to the legendary musician and actor Harry Belafonte, who is also speaking at Democracy Now!'s 20th anniversary celebration for more than half a century. Belafonte has been deeply involved in the fight for social justice. One of Dr. Martin Luther King's closest confidants. He helped organize the March on Washington in 1963. Harry Belafonte spoke last night at Riverside Church, the same location where Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King came out against the Vietnam War a year before his death. In 1967, he spoke.
In a few weeks from now, if there is a platform on which I will be privileged to stand and speak, my opening remarks would probably be something like, "Welcome to the Fourth Reich." I was talking with a comrade recently he was a victim of the Third Reich. He was a victim of the great Holocaust and what happened to the Jewish people during the reign of Hitler. And all my life, I have committed myself to making sure that here in this country, not for the want of effort, but I and so many others would be forever committed to the idea that America will remain an open and a free and a democratic society. With each cycle, those thoughts become a bit dimmed. And now, I think more than ever, we are in need of democracy now. I'm just at the threshold of my 90th year, and I had often... Who said that? I never thought I'd live this long, but to be able to share an evening with Danny Glover, and certainly with Noam Chomsky, for whom I have great affection and deep respect, that I can kind of dance out of here feeling like, well, I did it all. But in a way, each time it was done, we kind of figured it was the last time we would have to do it. During a lifetime of Paul Robeson, Eleanor Roosevelt, Dr. W.E.B. Du Bois, those who mentored me and guided me and inspired me, that I should have lived long enough to be able to stand here and once again say thanks to all my colleagues, to all of my comrades, to all of the people who have sacrificed so greatly to make this nation whole. We are looking upon a curious time, but I think it's a time that should be used as an opportunity to know that we had to make a much bigger difference than we've made up to now. We should not let the current state of affairs dull the fact that all that we have done was worthless. Nothing could be further from the truth. And as a passing thought, not so passing, but I'll take this opportunity to publicly, once again, for the last few months, passionate appeal has been made to President Barack Obama to use the power of the executive office to free my friend and our leader, Leonard Peltier. With the understanding that if he fails before now and the end of the year to step to the plate and do the right thing, it'll be a long time before we get a chance to think about Leonard being freed. But I think we just have to keep on keeping on.
The legendary entertainer and activist Harry Belafonte speaking Monday night at a celebration of Democracy Now's 20th anniversary at Riverside Church here in New York, the same site where Martin Luther King gave his historic speech against the Vietnam War, April 4th, 1967, a year to the day before he was assassinated. The actor, director, activist Danny Glover also spoke Monday night, referencing Dr. King's address.
I would be remiss if I would stand on this stage without mentioning one of the great moments on this stage nearly 50 years ago, when a young minister, a liberation theologist, one of the most extraordinary human beings of this century, any century, stepped here and with all this consciousness, with all the pain it took, denounced the war in Vietnam. Dr. Martin Luther King on this stage. Knowing that he spoke for his heart and his consciousness, knowing that he was doing something that he was going to be vilified, yet he spoke up. As we think about the moments ahead and the work that we have to do, the history that we must, it's imperative that we make. We have to think about those moments and use all our courage, every bit of it, whether it's in the service of finding the truth and finding those stories where those who feel that they are lost within their own country here and can only turn to the far right and everything else. So where we have to do and where we're going to have to go, and not simply just preaching to our choir, to our constituency, is farther than we've ever wanted to reach and understand. We have all the technology in the world. We have every single thing available to us, but organizing, taking ourselves serious about that, and doing the work we need to do, wherever it is going to take something from our hearts. It's going to take something deep from our hearts. So as we move forward and realize the work we have to do, Noam Chomsky talked about the opportunities that we have. Within, right here at this moment, we look at the demographics. He talks about the ways in which we can use what has happened as a platform to build, to create, to imagine, and continue to imagine. That's our responsibility right now. At 70 years old, or at 7 years old, at 90 years old, or whatever we are, we have to take that on. And certainly, we come armed with the information that Democracy Now! Has provided us through the journey that they've taken us on, learning lessons, finding new ways in which we can employ those lessons, use those lessons in our own work in that moment. And we are here to celebrate, but at the same time, to move forward more fiercely, more courageously than ever before. Thank you.
Actor, director, and activist Danny Glover speaking Monday night at Riverside Church. Democracy Now's own Juan Gonzalez also spoke at the event about his 20 years co-hosting Democracy Now!
We've been privileged to bear witness to the most important political events and social struggles of the past 2 decades, to interview some of the most brilliant grassroots leaders, artists, poets, scientists, from inmates bravely organizing within the prison industrial complex, to young immigrant dreamers fighting to keep their families intact, to visionary political and religious leaders from around the world seeking to make a better life for their people, to American soldiers resisting imperial war from within the military, to daring whistleblowers exposing secrets, the darkest secrets of capitalism and empire. In the true spirit of the working men's press of the 1830s, the muckrakers of the early 1900s, the revolutionary press of the 1970s, we've sought to do our part to keep alive dissident alternative news and information and analysis grounded in facts and research and in the service of social progress. As many of you know, I've been fortunate to not only have worked with Amy, one of the truly great journalists of our time, but also to have labored in 2 other major streams of the American media, the corporate or commercial press, and with the press of people of color, which has its own separate 200-year history because both the corporate press and the dissident press kept excluding racial minorities from their ranks. And my journalism has always been informed and shaped by my own struggles, successful mass struggles in the social movements of our time, from the 1968 Columbia student strike against the Vietnam War and racism, to the Young Lords in the 1970s, to the battle to remove Frank Rizzo, the racist, fascist mayor of Philadelphia, from his mayoralty, to the bitter 5-month strike at the New York Daily News from 1990 to 1991, the last successful newspaper strike in American history, and to the difficult and arduous battle in 2000, 2001 to save the Pacifica network from a corporate takeover. I resigned from the Daily News in May after 29 years there to devote myself to more in-depth research and writing, and I'm completing a book on the new progressive movements that have come to power in several U.S. cities the past few years. Those cities, you see, are the only hope right now for the nation's progressive movements, especially after the debacle we witnessed at the state and federal level last month, and as one advanced capitalist country after another faces the resurgence of right-wing, anti-immigrant, and neo-fascist movements. We must nurture and build progressive alliances at the city and local level, not despair or lose hope. And those of us who are journalists must keep reporting the facts, exposing the injustices, drawing the lessons of history, and speaking truth to power. Democracy Now! Has always drawn inspiration from people's struggles. Its biggest stories have come from the information gathered by activists and researchers who no one else would listen to. And 20 years after we started, with your help and support, it will continue to do so for longer than anyone thought possible. Thank you for coming tonight.
Democracy Now! Co-host Juan Gonzalez speaking Monday night. We end today's broadcast with the legendary singer, poet, author Patti Smith performing Monday night at Riverside Church, celebrating Democracy Now!'s 20th anniversary.
This first song, Tony and I wrote in memory of Rachel Corrie, who died on a peacekeeping mission on the Gaza Strip, such a young girl. And we'd like to do this song for all the young people that we have lost globally, young reporters, activists, photographers, just all the young people who have put themselves out in the front lines, who want, as the young man said, all they want is change. All they want is peace. And we also would like to remember all the young people who lost their lives in the Oakland fire. And when you look at the pictures of them, all of them brimming with such hope, we need our young people. We pin our faith on them. They are going to make the most revolutionary changes in human history. They will continue to build peace movements, to protect our environment. And so we sing this little song for them. Yesterday I saw you standing there with your hand against the pane, looking out the window at the rain. And I wanted to tell you all your tears were not in vain, but I guess we both knew we'd never be the same, never be the same. Why must we hide all these feelings inside? Lions and lambs shall abide. Maybe one day we'll be strong enough to build it back again, build a peaceable kingdom back again, build it back again.
Performing Monday night with her daughter Jessie Paris Smith and Tony Shanahan at Riverside Church, celebrating Democracy Now!'s 20th anniversary. Tune in tomorrow to Democracy Now! When we air an historic conversation between Noam Chomsky and Harry Belafonte, never before together in conversation at a public event. And that's what we did with them last night. You can also watch the full 2.5-hour event, the celebration of Democracy Now!, at democracynow.org. And that does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Is produced by Mike Burke, Nermeen Sheikh, Carla Wills, Laura Gottesdiener, Dina Guzder, Sam Alkoff, Robbie Karen, Hani Massoud, Sharina Nadura, and Andre Lewis, Mike DeFilippo, Miguel Noguera, and Paul Huckabee, our engineers. Special thanks to Becca Staley, Julie Crosby, Miriam Barnard, Erin Dooley, Hugh Grand, David Prude, R.L. Boone, Vesta Godars. I'm Amy Goodman. Our website is democracynow.org. Thanks for joining us.